is James Corsbrook. On the left-hand side, who is a former County Commissioner of Northamptonshire Girl Guiding and is representing Girl Guiding here today. Jane has not decided to speak simply because to save your time. So for the purposes of this, I'm responding on behalf of both organisations. Really, it's just for me a question or an affirmation, I guess, that having seen all of the publicity regarding what appears to be the removal of the community use of schools budget cut from the initial budget to the current budget, it's just confirmation for us that that is actually going to take place. We obviously saw all of the publicity around that, and whilst it wasn't entirely a surprise, I am very conscious that this is the decision-making body that will formally put that forward. So really for us, it's confirmation that that will occur, that it will be, the cut will be removed from the budget. And secondly, which is really, really important from our perspective, because it's in line with the values of our organisation, if that is the case, we would like to extend a very public thank you to the members of the Cabinet to listening to what was going on. We're conscious, you're probably aware that we made appearances before the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee, and we are very aware of what the recommendations of that were. But also, we engaged with the democratic process. My understanding is, having read the analysis, that some 900 responses were put in from the consultation. Well, 227 came from us. So on our small issue, we actually made up over 25% of your consultation responses. You will appreciate, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, we did actually get our act together to provide that response. And that probably just illustrates the level of importance that it was to us. Having said that, all of that could have been wasted had you not decided to listen. So thank you very much for listening. We appreciate there is yet another step, which is full council, which presumably, hopefully, will endorse that. But at this stage, thank you very much from both of us.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify that, you've obviously understand our democratic process well here. So if Cabinet are minded to approve the recommendations in the budget proposals, which would mean that the line that affected your organisation will not be in the papers that go to the final decision is Council. So we thank you for noting that we have listened, and hopefully that Council approve the budget next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Standish Day, please. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
The question I'd like to ask is how you can still justify not awarding employees a pay rise when there is £2 million of the council's under at the moment, and you've been announcing balancing the budget as a great success. But you've neglected to say that this is in part being paid for by staff. By no pay rise this year, the loss of the first day sick, no incremental pay progression, and by staff doing way over their hours and grades to cover vacant posts. We've drastically reduced teams and a lack of support services, and they're trying their very best to offer a good service to the county's residents. The Local Government Association's 2-year pay agreement, covering the period April 2018 to March 2020, has put NCC staff in a disadvantaged position as compared to other local government employees in neighbouring counties. Major increases in the cost of living over recent years have significantly reduced the value of staff wages, plus the cost of parking, which I read yesterday is also going up again in the borough. The lack of incremental progression for staff at NCC has created a lack of transparency and a disparity of pay within the organisation, which is affecting staff morale and retention. Some employees have been on their pay scale for 8 years and not reached the top. Your employees are fed up of reading about large payouts to senior managers who failed. They're fed up with reading about hundreds of thousands of pounds being found for external audits and transformation managers. They are fed up with large honoraria payments going to senior managers and very little going to frontline employees. We were told around 60% of managers on SM and above received honoraria last year. £87,000 was shared between the highest earning 100 employees. And there was £100,000 between the whole rest of the staff group. So it seems the senior managers received significant reward for their extra work, but not so much the ordinary employees. They also keep reading about new senior managers being employed on large salaries, and they wonder where this money magically appears from. Employees listened with interest to hear, Teresa, you tell them that you thought they deserved a pay rise, and you committed to giving employees a pay rise if the council exceeded its budget savings target. Well, there's £2 million here, which could be used to do this. Unison has stated on numerous occasions that the withdrawal of incremental pay without consultation is and was unfair to the hard-working staff that have kept the council running, and it contrasts with the number of senior managers who have left with considerable reward packages, including an outgoing chief exec about a year ago. We believe that adequate funding is available now and should be immediately provided in the budget to give all employees at least a cost of living pay rise and remove the first unpaid day of sick.
If you could look to finish up, please.
Okay, I'm almost done. We believe removing this will improve productivity, as staff will be able to take a day off to recover from a minor illness, rather than becoming more ill and potentially infecting colleagues by coming into work. We also believe that if you reward your staff properly, make them feel valued, treat them fairly, then many of the problems related to staff vacancies will sort themselves out. Ultimately, a return to full national terms and conditions is needed as soon as possible. This will make the two councils more attractive to potential employees and ensure the existing staff stay within the organisations, which will negate the need to keep paying huge amounts of money, public money I might add, to agencies for workers. We also believe a recruitment opportunity... If you could just
finish up, sir, if that's okay.
I've got one more paragraph and I'm done. So.
Okay, very quickly then.
We also believe a recruitment opportunity has been missed with the apprenticeship levy, which appears to be largely used by existing employees, many managers actually, to do management degrees, rather than used to encourage young people to work here. Your staff are your greatest asset, and they should be your first priority when setting the budget, not the last. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What I will say, it is one of our priorities. As you mentioned in your piece there, we will reward staff if we can afford to do it. And Teresa and I have made that commitment in the atrium addresses when we've spoken to staff, and there is another one on Monday, and that position remains. Chief Exec, did you want to add a comment?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I would like to respond because I have to say, firstly, I don't disagree with a lot of what you've just said, and I think you know that. And I did make a commitment to staff on behalf of the Cabinet, on behalf of the Commissioners and myself, that if a pay rise could be made, it would be made. And we have budgeted for that from the following year. We have a contingency in the budget, and nothing would give me greater pleasure than using that contingency to pay staff a pay rise. And what I would say to you today, and I will say on Monday to the staff, once we get into this year's budget delivery, if I find that we are managing to deliver that budget in a safe way, that will be released for a pay rise. And that could be mid-year, it could be early in the year, it could be later in the year. And if we can do that, we'll backdate that pay rise as well. So I'm making that commitment to staff on Monday. I make that commitment here today on behalf of the Cabinet, the Commissioners and myself. And we all are committed to giving staff and recognising staff for the efforts that they've made over the last number of years, in fact, in this council. Just could I mention as well apprenticeships, again, something that's very dear to my heart, and it's something that we've discussed at management team level recently, and we've set some targets around increasing our numbers to double. So I've given the team a target to double the numbers in a short period of time. And that's not at the senior level, that's apprenticeships, real apprenticeships. I've also, looking at a paper where I've only just yesterday sent out to my colleague chief execs across the county, asking for a discussion of how we might use that levy to actually help districts and boroughs to bring in more apprentices as well, so that we don't end up having to give money back to government, which would be a travesty.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'll now move on to presenting the paper. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that I'm very proud to present the budget to Cabinet today. It represents an immense amount of hard work, and I thank everyone who's been involved. And I look at the senior team and all levels of staff that have worked tirelessly to deliver this under some very, very challenging circumstances. And I think we've got to look and reflect briefly and put this into the context of the last 16 months or so and the journey that we've all been on, certainly as members and the council. If you rewind back briefly 12 months ago, you know, we're in a very, very different place. And although I think we are very clear on what challenges remain, both throughout the services and how we look to deliver the budget, the authority is in a very different place. And to be in a position to present the balanced budget today, which actually demonstrates that if the authority were to remain in place beyond 2020, as you can see in one of the charts in the paper, it can and should live within its means in a stable and sustainable way. Firstly, though, I'd begin by running Cabinet through the 16 or so recommendations listed on the page 1 of the report. So, at point A, it says we've got the Cabinet, the revenue budget of 1920, which sets a gross general fund revenue budget of 618.84 million and a net revenue budget of 417.72 million. A total council tax requirement for the council's own purposes for 2019-20 of 303.33 million. And a bounty council tax of £1,236.10p, which is an increase of 4.99% from 2018-19, with a band A to H Northamptonshire County Council precept detail for 2019-20 is set out in the table underneath. The detailed proposals underpin the MTFP revenue budget for 2019 as set out within Appendix G of the report. The planned utilisation of the dedicated schools grant for 2019-20 as set out in Appendix E. D, the fees and charges for 2019-20 as set out within Appendix F. E, the capital strategy as at Appendix H. F, the Treasury management strategy for 1920 as at Appendix 1, which includes the potential indicators, including the capital finance requirement of 740.4 million and the authorised borrowing requirement of £805 million. And also the annual investment strategy as at Appendix 1 to 5. G, the minimum revenue provision policy as at Appendix 1 to 4. And H, the updated transformation products funded by the flexible use of capital receipts required to deliver the transformation strategy 2019-20, included in paragraphs 13.5 and 13.13 of this report and set out at Appendix J. And Cabinet also asked to note the consultation feedback as at Appendix A as having been taken into consideration. J, the equality impact feedback as at Appendix B as having been taken into consideration. K, the Chief Finance Officer's Section 25 report as at Section 16 of this document. And I, the letter from the Commissioners on the 2019-20 budget and medium-term financial plan as at Appendix K. And the Cabinet delegates authority to the Section 151 officer to manage any variation as a result of the business rates forecasts from district and borough councils which are still to be received. And I'll ask the Section 151 officer to comment on that in a little while. So we are all aware the draft budget came to Cabinet back in December, and we've been through the scrutiny process and a public consultation, and we've already talked about that. I would just like to thank again members who contributed to the scrutiny process, and we've had that item previously and noted that. There are some differences between the draft budget of the final version, which is before us today, which has already been highlighted, and that's highlighted and outlined on page 17 to 20 on the report and detailed further, Appendix D, pages 81 to 82. And I make the point again about the robustness that has been tested on the proposals that have been brought forward, and there has been some changes, and I think that's a prudent thing to do. So obviously one significant factor is the extra 2% council tax that government has granted us permission to request. So 4.99% council tax increase is being proposed, which would mean that the county would have the second lowest like-for-like county tax rate in the country, while at the same time being able to further stabilise its finances and invest in areas people have said are most important to them. We've already heard from our friends from the Scouts and representation from the Guides as well today. So this means the majority of households in the county will be asked to pay between 75p and £1 a week extra. A key point here is the fact the increase will go into the baseline budget and will aid the creation of the two new unitary authorities in terms of creating a solid financial foundation. And I thank government for allowing us to do this. And I have to also note that With the district and borough leader colleagues, we've spoken regularly to government and put in a selection of asks, and I think this is recognition that government are listening, along with things like granting the business rate pilot for the next year. So government, we know, are supporting us, and this council and opposition colleagues have been critical of government in the past, but I have to say that we're communicating well with government. The MPs are listening to us and they are doing their bit on behalf of the council, and I want to recognise that. Two other significant points with regard to changes are the reversal of the proposal to charge the uniform and community groups for the use of the schools, a recommendation of Scrutiny, as we've already talked about, and a message that came out loud and clear from the consultation. Secondly is to reinstate the gritting routes to previous levels. And that was something that when we were posed with a question, do we accept the 2%, I put the challenge, as I've talked about in the media, to the Chief Exec to say, OK, if we're asking public for more money, we need to be given something tangible back, and I think that is recognition of that. Furthermore, there is a contingency of some £2.11 million, which, although I hope we do not need to use, can only be considered right and prudent, and there's already been suggestions and talks of how that should be used if we're in a position to do that, and I hope that we do get ourselves into that position. I would like to remind all members that we've only been able to consider putting things back into the budget because of the council tax allowance and due to the fact that the council is demonstrating a much tighter grip and control of its finances, and it represents how much progress we've made over this last 12 months or so. Other key features of the budget include a reversal of previous decisions regarding highway inspections, an additional £1.2 million for children's services, a reversal of plans to charge for higher specifications of community equipment in adult social care, and an extra £673,000 towards independent adult social care placements. Although there are £41.4 million worth of savings to achieve next year, which will represent a challenge in itself, but the budget also recognises growth, demography and inflation at some good and prudent rates, and I think that is something that has to be a positive inclusion in the budget. I have confidence through how this budget is constructed and through how our excellent transformation strategy have been put together that we will be able to deliver this budget, even though it does represent another huge challenge for this authority. Cabinet, this budget is key to how we stabilise our finances to be sustainable as we transition towards local government reorganisation, and this goes also a long way to honouring the commitments I made to you, government and to our partners when I became leader that I would do my very best to honour. And all of us have played a key part in getting us to this place, including cabinet members that have served. I see Councillor Clark here, Councillor Bowen, other members, the way Scrutiny has performed, the way our backbenchers have contributed to this, and of course the challenge from the opposition. And all of us, as I've just said, have played a key part in getting us to this place. While we are clear on the challenges that lay ahead, I am proud, as I said at the beginning, to recommend this budget to Cabinet and then to full Council next week. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to invite Cabinet members to offer any contributions. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Leader. I think this is quite an astonishing turnaround. This Council was in a terrible place 14 months ago. I won't go back through it. I won't recapitulate such a bad history. We have turned it round from being that situation to being a very impressive one. We've managed to balance a budget and we're now proposing to balance next year's budget. However, I'd like to sound a few warnings there. A council of this size should have reserves of about 100 million. We started out with none. With luck, we'll have 20 in perhaps a year's time. That's still just barely adequate. So the unitaries will be able to get off the ground without already being in section 114, but it's going to be a tight period from then onwards, and we will continue to need to keep our belt tightened for the next 12 months at least. And the contingency that was referred to earlier of 2 million must be held back in case anything happens that's unexpected. Normally, once again, you would expect a contingency of between 5 and 10 million for a council of this size. 2 million is a bare minimum. So we've achieved a miracle, but that's just got us back to the point where we can take a deep breath and think, right, now the next stage.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, reflecting what you've said, I think it is worth pointing out where our overspend was in 2018-19 originally. It was at 64.1 million at the time of the Section 114 notice was issued in August 2018. Currently, it has been reduced by 62.8 million to 1.4 million based on the latest financial projections. And that just puts in perspective the journey we've been on. Obviously, no one can rest on their laurels, as we say, and there's still a long way to go, and there are still pressures. But I think we do have to recognise the great work that everyone has done in order to get us in that direction. And then I wanted to mention the winter maintenance service that the Leader talked about as well. We are fully reinstating that for next year. As he said, that is really directly as a result of being able to get this extra 2% from the government, which has allowed us to put various things back in. It's worth pointing out that we never wanted to remove the winter service in the first place. It was one of those really tough decisions, and we always made it very clear that we would put it back whenever we could. This has probably happened a lot sooner than we thought, but that is the good news. It is back in its entirety for next year. But also for this year, we have allowed 250,000 for the remainder of winter for what we're calling extra precautionary routes, if you see what I mean. So we are doing extra gritting in this current year as well. We'll have to see how the weather goes. Of course, it seems to have gone rather mild, although we did have a cold night last night and they were out gritting again. And I would like to thank all our crews and our teams at the Highways team for all the work they've been doing on that. I just wanted to reflect on that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Evansworth.
Yes, to add to Councillor Morris, I think every day now all the councillors have an update of what is gritted or not, so they can reassure their division what has been done, and I think that is an extra little thing to show how we have heard. Also, for me, what has not been mentioned is at the last page of the report, it's a letter from the Commissioner. And I take great comfort on that, because if you remember last year when we have the section 25 of the report, it was quite difficult to interpret. This time it is very clear. Thanks has been given to people for what thanks to be given, and I'm sure with the help of the commissioners, the new team, the cabinet and all the backbencher and even opposition who has worked during the scrutiny, I am reassured that next year we are in a much better place. So please remember, when you vote at council, the last page is the commissioner report plus the section 25, which will give you reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I bin opposition colleagues, did you want to say something? Yeah, Councillor Lane Hawley.
Yeah, the situation in adult social care, I just want to say, is it's momentous, really, when you think about it. And like Councillor Mercer also said, with the budget, the situation we are in, we cannot forget the hard work and dedication that people have shown to this process. I'm slightly worried that our colleagues on the opposition are quite negative. I would have thought that they would see the evidence quite clearly in what's in front of them. But I'd like to thank the Scrutiny Committee for their due diligence in looking at adult social care, and I'm sure they'd agree that all their concerns were addressed. And I understand it's an ongoing process, which I'm really happy about being part of the process. Also, I think we've got to really realise that it's about improved management, and what we do now, we're doing more with less. We're finding new innovative ways of working, and that's really reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. There are huge challenges in the children's service, and we are all trying very hard to make sure that we make savings without affecting any of the young people that are in our care. We are working through all of the management teams and all of our contracts, etc., to make sure that we can make our savings without actually directly affecting the children that we look after. I've taken this role on to carry on the work that my colleague Councillor Perry did before me, and I know that she did a very good job in that way, looking after our children, and I hope to do the same.
Thank you. And it was remiss of me when I was talking about cabinet members that have contributed to this, not to mention Councillor Perry, who is sitting out of my eye line, which is why I didn't see So I recognise that as well, and the continuing work Councillor Perry's done as well. Thank you. So before we bring in opposition colleagues, I was going to ask the 151 officer, particularly around section 3.5, it references the bit about the valuation and the impact that will have on things moving forward. And just invite you to give us a comment on that.
Yes, thank you, Leader. The journey of the council and to make a recovery from its difficult position has got three elements to it. There's the deficit from last year. There's the progress we're making this year, which is the subject of a separate report, and the setting of this budget. For last year and the deficit, that is planned to be covered by the capitalisation direction, which also allows us to create a minimum level of reserves. And what we need around that is sufficient capital receipts to take advantage of that dispensation. The biggest capital receipt is actually the sale of 1 Angel Square, and how we account for those proceeds. And in paragraph 3.5, you'll see from that we're in discussion with the external auditor and our independent valuers around the value of that building, if you like, for accounting purposes. I had hoped that I'd be able to advise you what the agreed position on that is. Unfortunately, I can't. We had a telephone conference call 4:30 yesterday evening. It's still left for 2 sets of valuers to have a discussion about what the appropriate number is. Those discussions will continue. I hope I can bring an update before the council meeting next week. But while I've got the microphone, can I take advantage, please? And I agree with many of the comments that have been made, and it would be the wrong thing to think that we can take our foot off the gas by approving this budget. There's an awful lot to be done. And in my statement, which is in paragraph 16, you'll see that it runs to 66 sections, paragraphs, and the conclusion about the robust nature of the budget. What I would want to stress, that doesn't mean that every single budget line will be met. There's a lot will happen over the next 12 months and we'll get ups and downs. But in the round, I'm satisfied that this is a robust budget that the council can agree, but there's still some distance to travel. So just to be clear about that.
Thank you. Councillor Hake will indicate first.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I'd like to thank Scrutiny and particularly the Chair, Councillor Scrimshaw, for the way in which he conducted that. And despite some others thinking I shouldn't have been in the room, I was very happy to be for most of those meetings. The apprentices, if we could just have an understanding of that, we are losing 666,000 in this year's budget because we were unable to spend on apprentices. The libraries issue, in the scrutiny and now coming into the main budget, we were expecting in that result that the cost to community groups of taking on library buildings would be here by the end of January 2019. Personally, I don't think we've seen that. And whilst you're talking about things being offline, I think we need to know that because the uncertainty still exists and we are past the end of January as far as I know. It was interesting to see in the consultation that our colleagues at Daventry asked at an early stage if the government would increase council tax. So maybe on occasion we need to go to Daventry to find things which will help us to increase our council tax on that. In terms of gritting and libraries, last year when an additional 1% came forward from government just before Christmas, the idea of reinstating gritting and libraries was put forward to use that 1%. KPMG said, no, you're not taking the hard decisions and you shouldn't be doing it. It's fascinating to hear that the 2% is being used in the same way in a positive spin this year. Boroughs and districts were due, and when the commissioners and I sat in this room under scrutiny, were to be bringing forward 1.8 million this year from council tax collection funds and 5.2 million in next year's budget. Sitting at Kettering, listening to the budget there, Ernst & Young said that the legalities of the two
entities fighting each other and with legal and barristers and so on meant that that was not coming forward. I'd quite like to understand how that 1.8 million and 5.2 is being redressed in this particular budget, because it seems quite clear that the boroughs and districts and county were unable to work together, which was a specific ask of the commissioners sitting in this particular room. We actually have to work together. In continually being talked about opposition, I'm not in opposition to anything. I'm in support of the people who I represent. I always find in opposition to. We're all here. We may scrutinise or we may be critical, but being in opposition to is not that particular word. So, if I move on to the Commissioner's letter in my last 24 seconds, the Commissioner's letter, which is much praised, the county remains fragile and it is credible and achievable subject to situation remains serious. So if I were on the Titanic right now, I might feel comforted by the captain's voice, but I can still hear the grinding of the iceberg, and I think we really do need...
If you could finish your comments.
Yes, well, you just spoiled it. I do feel the grinding of the iceberg there, and just because the crew has changed. Thank you very much for my 7 seconds.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Scott.
I'll just go to Councillor McGee.
Thank you. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Leader. I'm glad you reflected back on why we're here. We should not forget we're here because of financial incompetence by your administration, which many of you sitting at this table played a part. Let's not forget that in the first place, because that's true. Financial incompetence by the administration and political leadership that tried to privatise services at a time of austerity. It was wrong, and it's been proved wrong. But, Chair, I won't go on too much about the budget today because we have an opportunity at full council.
Well, this is questions about the budget.
Absolutely. The question I would raise, Chair, is that the 2% council tax, given that we've got this 2% council tax, given that you've got this contingency and the reserves, and I know it's a low reserves, and you're far from anywhere near a very impressive council, far from it. And I think most of Northamptonshire will agree with that, especially the ones that have to pay an extra 2% council tax that are being punished for your mistakes. So let's be realistic. I heard the kind words about our staff. Our staff have worked extremely hard over the last years to try and get us out of this mess. In fact, I was sitting with a young person and a social care worker yesterday in someone's house trying to sort a problem. And you see how hard they work. So let's not just talk about words, nice words. We may do that if we have money. Let's make a commitment today. Today, make that commitment today and say it will be in the budget that our staff have a pay rise because they deserve it. And that will bring the confidence to the staff to work harder, and they work extremely hard now. So let's make that commitment today in this cabinet that we will support the staff. We will say it now, and it will be at full council that that extra money will help give a pay rise to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Stanborough.
Thank you, Chair. I also want to talk about the lack of a pay increase for staff in the proposals as currently drafted, and the fact that there is a contingency in the budget which almost to the penny is the amount that is needed to pay a 2% increase to staff in 2019-2020. And if you have a look at the figures for years 2, 3 and 4 of the proposals, you will see that the amount that is factored in for pay increases in those years, and I know this because I've asked for the figures, includes the increase on the increase. So if you paid an increase next year, you'd pay a small amount extra on it in following years. Clearly, that pay increase for staff was included in an earlier iteration of this budget, and at some point somebody made the decision to take it out and create a contingency instead. What I'd like to know is who made that decision and what was the reason for it.
Okay, thank you. Well, on the staff point, I think it's been very clear in what we've said this morning that we've made a commitment to honour that pay increase if we're in a position to do that. And Councillor McGee made a point about our staff will work harder. Frankly, I don't think the staff can work much harder than they already are to deliver, you know, under the circumstances that that we're trying to deal with. So I think we've been very clear on where we see honouring that commitment as we move forward. Of course, we've got to be prudent, and it's very easy to remind us why we got here, and we acknowledge that, and we have done in all the right ways, I think, but it's up to us to make sure that this organisation, the services, the finances are in the best position possible as we transition into unitary. So again, I think we've made that commitment again on the staff issue, and it will be referenced again on Monday at the atrium address. In terms of some of Councillor Hakero's points, I think we don't, you know, Cabinet isn't about airing grievances, it's about asking us pertinent questions. And I think, again, I will suggest that those issues with the libraries need to be picked up and dealt with according to your local need. In terms of the council tax point, I don't know if Mr Duncan would like to make any points referencing those.
Yes, the council tax proposal, which was part of the stabilisation plan, referred to, related to the current year, 18-19. That is covered in item 9, which we will come to. In terms of 19-20, the districts and boroughs notify us of their tax base and collection fund surpluses, and what we've been advised of has been built into 19-20. So there's no disagreement between ourselves and the districts and boroughs in that regard.
It is a 6 million cover.
The surpluses on the collection fund have been notified to us, and that has been included in this budget. And the council tax base increase, i.e. the number of properties we can levy a council tax on, has been increased, and that will be in recognition of the various discussions that took place during this year. And so that's around collection performance, single person discount review, the assessment of bad debt. It was all of those things which each individual district and borough will have taken into account and then notified us of their assessment of the position.
Sorry, Councillor Hakel, through the chair, please. Else we'll remove you.
The 6 million that was there.
Well, you've had a chance to ask and answer your question. Right. I just want to ask if Paul Helsby might want to contribute around the transformation strategy, which is key to delivering the budget and Cabinet. And I just wanted to assure other members we've had a very good presentation on how that sits and how that functions and works. And I think it's just interesting for members to just get your take on that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Leader. The key to everything is the ability to maintain the services on a daily basis that people work really hard to do and provide the capacity to change at the same time. So that's a fundamental principle of the strategy. The second part of the strategy is to improve the governance and assurance. So there has been great lengths that we've explained to Scrutiny and to Cabinet of the work that's gone on behind the scenes that falls into the category of doing the boring well. And that is about the processes, the resources and the capacity to assure the delivery of the savings that are set out in the transformation strategy. So it's two things really. A much stronger level of governance around those things, so we know much sooner when things need to be addressed, and also that capacity to improve and change whilst we still deliver the day job. And those are the fundamental principles of it.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to come back on Councillor Scrimshaw's interesting political speech there that we had a minute ago. McGee, sorry, apologies. I meant McGee. I get confused. You look alike. About the council tax in particular, I find it a bit rich from our Labour colleagues that they complain about a potential tax rise when they've been lobbying us for one for a number of years and have said we should be putting it up. This is a very minor uplift. When you look at it, it still makes us the second lowest council tax in the country, and I think for the services that we can protect and in fact enhance with that uplift, I think our friends in the Labour Party might want to decide to change their rhetoric around a council tax rise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. The first comment I'd make is that I'm not aware of an earlier iteration of this budget where that 2 million was put down as a staff increase. It was down as a contingency from the very moment I first saw any draft, and then was suggested that we might be able to use it as a staff increase afterwards if it's not needed. So it's the other way round, in my experience, compared with what was alleged. The second point I'd make is that this is the second lowest council tax precept for a comparable county, i.e. one that doesn't have fire and rescue service responsibilities anymore. It is remarkably low under the circumstances, and it's a testament to the quality of work that's been done in the last year that we've managed to turn this around without having significant injections of central government money to bail us out. We did it on our own.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm not going to attempt to pull all that together, but what I will say is recognise that you know, we're under no illusions that we've got a massive challenge to deliver this budget next year, as well as finish off where we are with this current year, and we'll come on to that in a little while. So I think there's no jumping up and down saying, look how good we are, look what we've done. We're fully recognise that this is a massive challenge that we're presented with next year. But having seen and heard about how this budget has been assembled, it's been fundamentally different to what certainly I've seen before, and we've heard about how the transformation strategy underpins the deliverability of this, that we've got, or I certainly have, the confidence that this time next year we're going to be talking about hopefully delivering not only this current year's budget that we're in, but next year's as well. And so I'm very happy to commend this budget to Cabinet today. The Cabinet, do we agree the recommendations? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, item 8 is the council plan. This is a corporate document that we need to have in place. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but to me it is exceedingly clear what we need to do as an authority over the next 12 months, 2 years, until we transition through to local government reorganisation. So this talks about our strategic vision. It talks about stabilisation, transformation and transition. So I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but I would welcome any comments from colleagues or for the opposition. But it's something we need to have in place, and again, it's about our vision for Northamptonshire. It references education, the economy, and all the things that we know we need to do. Unfortunately, we've not had time to focus on some of the issues and talk about the vision moving forward, because we're virtually entirely consumed and focused with dealing with the situation that the County Council has found itself in. So that's not an excuse, but it is a very good reason to focus our energies. So any comments from colleagues? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, you said the report is clear. Well, that's absolutely right. It is very clear. It repeats things about 4 times. I mean, I thought normally we'd repeat things 3 times, but you've gone one further this time. The report says that in terms of its rating, the council does not have a clear articulated vision and strategy, and that's amber rated. You know, which seems to go against the point you're making 4 times in the documentation. And one thing I would ask a question on, Chair, is if we look at page 47 and the 3rd and 4th bullet point, where it says reducing health inequalities amongst the county's communities and tackling the top 10 health risks in partnership with citizens and health and social care colleagues. But if we refer back to the Scrutiny report on page 23, right at the bottom of that page, it says the Directorate was not aware of any issues connected with the provision of care to people from different communities in the county. So how can we really satisfy what we're expected to deliver if we don't know that information? I think it was a point that was made earlier by Councillor Stone when she referred to one particular community, I think it was an African community, where in fact they were being required to eat food which was totally against the food that they'd normally eaten themselves in their daily lives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stanborough.
Thank you, Chair. So it's called the Council Plan. The definition of a plan is a detailed proposal for doing or achieving something. So I'm arguing about the term plan. It's 9.5 pages long, 2 1/4 of which are taken up by pictures. I don't think it's a detailed proposal. As you've said, Chair, it may well be a vision, and if you called it that, then that would be fair enough, but hardly a plan. Perhaps the plan will come at some point in the future, but I think you'd agree with me that it doesn't satisfy the definition of a plan right now, does it?
Thank you. Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Leader. Just to identify some irony, on page 56 or page 6 of your plan, it seems ironic with the lack of knowledge and clear information that we put a picture of a library. I don't really know how the irony is there, but libraries are still under consultation and still don't know what those who want to do something can do. That's a statement. In your page 3, above the picture of Brixworth Country Park, we can only do this in partnership with other public sector organisations such as the 7 boroughs and district councils, NHS, police. What sort of plans have you got, given the events of the last week, where it seems that everyone's fallen out over the setting up of the shadow boards? What are your plans to actually recover that? And I still say that there's some issue, which I'll come back to you, on that 6 million. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I think the key to this is transformation. That is mentioned on page 7 and 8. It brings home that we can only achieve these goals, execute this plan, if there is fundamental transformation at all levels in the public sector in this county. And that is our goal. We have control over what happens in Northamptonshire County Council for the next 12 months roughly. After that it will be the 2 unitaries, but there will have to be significant transformation. You can't go on running a council in crisis mode with 114 notice in place. You've got to get to a point where you can you can breathe easily, where you don't have to be struggling every day, where you don't have to be looking for every penny. And the only way you can do that is by transforming services so that we work smarter, we have less travel time, for instance, that people are more often in the right place rather than having to travel between different locations. We need to be more efficient. That will inevitably involve more digital technology, but it will also mean some changes in working practices, which hopefully will make life easier for our staff as well. And the bottom line is, this is a journey we're on. It's a transformation journey.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Well, just to come back on a couple of points, this is a high-level plan. It's a corporate strategic plan. It's not a detailed plan. If you want detail, and another detailed plan, I think we've got that here, which is the budget plan, which we've just talked about, and there is plenty of detail there, which set aside the transformation strategy, which has already been to Cabinet. So there's the detail for delivering the vision that we talk about in here. In terms of partnership working that Councillor Hakewell referenced, I think we are continuously developing those partnerships, and none more so than the progress and success we're having in adult social care, working with our partners, and an simple illustration of the DTOC figures that have we've come down from being in the lowest quartile to to being in the highest quartile in terms of the performance, and that's down to how we'll work effectively with our partners. There's also police as well. You know, we're working closely with police. We've now got police permanent secondment into our authority to make sure we've got those bridges covered. And in terms of our district and borough colleagues, yes, there's been some well-reported stuff in the news this week, but we are fully committed to the transition and transformation through to the local government reorganisation process, and that is one of the entire focuses of this council as we move forward. So I'm not having any of that criticism, frankly. I think that's enough. Okay. So Cabinet, do we agree with the plan? Thank you. Right. Item 9 is the monthly revenue monitoring report. I'm sorry if I'm becoming a bit monotonous here, but I've got a lot to get through. So, again, I'm delighted to present this report to Cabinet today. Following comments made by members of all parties, the report continues to grow and evolve I would like to think it's recognised it offers more clarity, more detail and more commentary, and I hope members recognise this. If we refer to the page 72 and the table that we often refer to at this point when we're talking about this item, we can see the forecast overspend is now showing at £1.365 million. I'd like to remind Cabinet and members that back in July last year, the ask stood at £64.2 million and is illustrated on the table on page 71. And again, that graph is there after listening to suggestions from some members. To now be showing an overspend of less than £1.5 million represents a massive achievement. And last month, period 8, the overspend was forecast at £11 million. This change of £9.658 million from the previous month is another big step forward. And you can see on the table that the main contributors to this change have been adult social services, place, wellbeing and the prevention and corporate treasury and technical services. And I'll invite Cabinet members responsible for these areas, as well as the 151 officer, to comment shortly on these. The stabilisation plan is referenced a number of times, stating positions before and after the stabilisation plan in the commentary. I'd also like to remind Cabinet and members that when the stabilisation plan came out, we as members of the administration made it clear that we would expect to see other plans being worked on in case some elements of the stabilisation plan were unable to deliver. And I'm very pleased to say that this is exactly what has happened, and I commend the work of officers and the commissioners to this end. I cannot emphasise enough how much hard work, toil and dedication it's taken to grip and deliver what is now nearly a balanced budget for this current year. Without the dedication of our staff, senior officers, the commissioners and members, we could not have got where we are now. Given where we were a year ago, this represents a huge amount of progress. Again, while we recognise there is much work to do and there are many challenges that remain, the fact that this authority is demonstrating it can control and deliver, especially with regard to its finances, is something, again, all members can be proud of. So, Cabinet, I will ask you to make any contributions or ask questions. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I'll talk about place, if I may. We're reporting an underspend of 1.327 million, which is actually quite a significant improvement on where we were at. And there are a number of factors around how we've achieved that, which are all detailed on page 79. But I would also like to talk about the stabilisation plan, which I think is one of the key prongs of our approach to getting down our spend and to control our spending and all that sort of thing. If you look at that, each area has actually got quite a bit of stabilisation plan delivery in it. And it just shows you that combined with our prudent financial management, transition and various other factors that we're applying, we're gaining real traction on the figures here, and that is one of the many reasons why we are within spitting distance of balancing this budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll bring you chaps in a second, if that's okay. Councillor Naden-Hawley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, you know, it's testament, as I say, to the work that's been done, and the underspend in adults is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I can't get that word out. There's a number of factors about that, quite a few factors. The fact is that there's a cultural change, a definite cultural change. We've got joined up working, we've got the transformation, which Paul Helsby is doing a marvellous job on that, and I do welcome that. We've got the new provider framework, new models of care. It's recognised that we pay more than we need to pay, and I welcome the Scrutiny and their support of the Council's approach in building resilient communities, leading to the right support for the residents of Northamptonshire, because we want to be encouraging the residents to live independently. We must stop talking about service reductions and focus on the right care models and doing more with less. It's not about risk, it's about using the resources we have more effectively. And I welcome the recommendation on page 27, and I ask Cabinet to note my response. I also want to bring in the Shaw PFI, and I'm absolutely delighted that we've been able to change that, because we were told for so long that we couldn't do anything, and it just was about having a conversation with the right people, and it's opened up the fact that we can now make changes, and those changes are going to come about because Shaw Healthcare have recognised that it's not about how we are managing the contract, it's about how they set it up in the first place. There's many other stories, but I can't go on. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr Duncan, 151 officer, would you like to give a bit of commentary around the £5.068 million?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Leader. And part of that explanation, and one of the important changes that has occurred, if I could take members to the table on page 69. And this is about the unfunded deficit brought forward from 17-18. And the bottom figure in that table is 39.667 million. That figure in previous months was shown as £35.3 million. And turning over to page 70 gives an explanation which I'd like to take members through. In the table on page 70, the first column of figures was the position when the accounts were drawn together for the first time for the old year. As events unfolded, what happened was a number of those reserves that are listed there, and it's the second column of figures, were used to reduce the deficit on the general balance, and that was the figure that was shown in previous statements. And the third column there was the reserves that were left remaining. On the highlighted side of the table, the intention now is that the deficit position on the general balance will only be reduced by 376,000. That frees up, in the next column, £2.757 million, which can be used because those reserves are no longer needed. That contributes, it provides an income to the council in 2018-19, i.e. the current year. And when we do that, the balance remaining on the reserves are listed there. And towards the bottom, the intention is to make a contribution to the insurance reserve of £1.8 million. If I then jump forward to page 81, paragraph 5.34. The reserves I've mentioned there are listed in that paragraph, along with a planned contribution to the insurance reserve of £798,000. That's no longer required because of the contribution we're making to the reserve that I mentioned earlier. So those numbers on their own add up to £3.5 million and clearly is a significant contribution. Other aspects in corporate, there's £400,000 there, deferred income relating to the sale of One Angel Square. That's still part of the discussion with auditors. We're confident that figure we can rely on, and that will be the minimum position, and that's why we've included it. And that was an initiative that was in the stabilisation plan. The other one that I draw members' attention to is in paragraph 5.35 on page 82. We have been in discussion with the pension fund actuaries. The pension fund contributions include contributions over the next 17 to 20 years of the deficit that exists on the pension fund. The discussion we've had with actuaries is whether there can be a reduction in that deficit payment in 18-19. Their view is that is possible, and that could be up to £2 million. We've included in this projection £1 million, but I would stress it's subject to approval by the Pension Committee, which will meet in March. So I just wanted to be absolutely clear about that. And again, while I've got the microphone, if I can just come back, and it's the comment that's already been raised in page 88. The stabilisation plan did include nearly £8 million worth of additional income from council tax and collection fund surpluses from the boroughs and districts. As explained in that paragraph, we think it's the art of the possible. However, to prove that, it looks as if we would have to go to legal recourse. We don't want to do that. And therefore, and when Councillor Longley said last time we were working on a Plan B was all of the things that you see in this report. And just going back to the earlier comment about, so where is that in the 1920 budget, you will see in the papers that have just been agreed, there's a collection fund surplus of £7.7 million. That's in one of the tables. And also the council tax figure of 303 million includes some of the initiatives that would have been included in the stabilisation plan. You'll not see it as an individual item, but the essence is in the figures for 1920 takes all of those things into account.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like, if I can, to talk about the pressure on winter gritting that's in this report. And I was pleased to hear you say, Leader, that the budget reinstates the gritting routes to previous levels. And I think most people would therefore assume that the 400 or so kilometres of roads that were moved from the precautionary network to the adverse network in the report that you approved last October are therefore being moved back to the precautionary network and will be gritted along with the roads currently on the precautionary network. That would be how I would interpret a statement that says reinstates the gritting routes to previous levels. However, according to NN Highways, the changes that are going to be introduced will be introduced soon, admittedly that was 2 days ago, and we'll see the introduction of a new intermediate gritting network. These will be treated after the precautionary routes have been completed. So which is it? Are we going back to what we had before, or are we introducing a new level which sits somewhere in between the precautionary and the adverse? Thank you.
I'll come back to that. Come back on that straight away. You've got your years confused, Councillor Stamborough. The reinstatement and the intermediate route is to do with reinstatement in this year's budget. What we're talking about, what we're talking about is next year's budget.
I'm talking about about this year's.
Next year.
Okay.
This report is.
Okay, Councillor Morris.
I think I covered that earlier, but I'm happy to answer it again. What we're doing is we're having a look currently at what we're going to reinstate for next year. We're currently doing extra gritting now. We're doing this, what you call precautionary plus route, which is a beefed up version of the precautionary plus extra routes. We do have a slight problem in that some of the gritting machines are actually too big to go down some roads, so it is going to be a little bit difficult to grit every single road that was removed, but we are working hard on a plan, and I think we will have something probably fairly soon, at the end of the week or next week certainly, which will flesh out a bit more what we're proposing to do next year. But that is still, the budget figure still going back in. It's just what we can achieve with that, and hopefully we can achieve more with that, because you never know. We will try and get more gritting done. And of course, you've got to remember that with that reinstated, we'll be at about 41%, which will put us way above almost everybody else in our surrounding area, if not in the country. So we will be gritting at levels far higher than most counties in the country, if that gives you any comfort. Thank you, Chair.
I'll take that back. I was still on budget mode for next year. Okay, Councillor Hakewell.
Just quickly to come back on that one with Councillor Morris. So the roads that were originally gritted because we had the thin enough machines to do it, we've lost some of those machines, and now the bigger machines which remain won't go down the roads that we used to. Just to ask that as my first. I need my 3 minutes or he'll cut me off. When do we expect the detailed work, I think carried out by SIPFA, on understanding exactly what the past position is? I'm understanding there is additional work going on to and before we confirm the outcome of previous years. If that's not the case, then that I understand. The sale of Angel Square seems to have been a bit of a saviour, despite some dithering about whether we should. Have we got enough, including Angel Square, and any other capital receipts to get to the top of the 70 million dispensation, which, as I understand it, only is allowable for this financial year? Or will we lose some of that because of a lack of capital receipts? 5.29, Councillor Morris, page 79, Northampton Schools PFI, I think it's yourself, receipt of a 300k insurance rebate. Is that ongoing? Indeed, is the increase in forecast income ongoing? I should also declare that I'm a member of the Pensions Committee this last 5 years, so obviously looking forward to seeing that particular item coming through. Is that dispensation going out to all employers, or is this just a single one-off in terms of the difficulties here? And presumably the deficit payment will have to be recovered in a future year, but it might just save us for next year. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Scott, did you?
I'll defer to Councillor Scrutiny.
Thank you, Chair. It is welcome news that the Council's financial position has changed so much in just 1 month, and we're now looking at an in-year overspend of just £1 million, or just over £1 million. But before you congratulate yourselves too much, can I offer just a small word of caution? Most of these improvements have come about by financial and accounting methods rather than any sustainable long-term improvements. For example, it was an accounting masterstroke to reclaim the £4 million odd reserves used to shore up the 17-18 budget against the capital receipts under the government's special permission that they've given us. I'm not entirely sure that that was what they originally had in mind, but there's no doubt it was clever, although that begs the question of where did the idea come from? Was it the financial portfolio holder, the commissioners, or the new senior management team? But this again is just a one-off short-term sticking plaster measure and doesn't address the financial pressures on the council going forward, nor help the long-term financial pressures that the new unitary will pick up. And another benefit has come along this month, which has been mentioned, in paying £1 million less into staff pensions this year. Now, it's hard to comment on that because we haven't seen the details of the report suggesting that this could be done. But I warn you that by not paying into staff pensions, that's often a sign of an organisation in trouble. And I suspect the public will see this particular measure as proof that the financial position is still desperate, and that our staff may see this as simply another kick in the teeth from an organisation that has got a track record of being unsupportive to them. It's clear to me that the story of NCC's financial chaos is not over yet, as I believe referenced by the Section 151 officers' earlier comments about some of the individual budget lines in next year's budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to re-emphasise what I said earlier, that this is still a council that's under extreme stress. We're no longer in a crisis situation, but we've still got a lot of work to do before we can get to a point of sufficient stability that we're not having to look for one-offs and we're not having to worry about every single penny. The point is not that we've fixed all the problems. No one was ever suggesting that. We got through an almost insurmountable set of problems this year. We got through a year when most people thought we were going to literally go bankrupt with the cheques bouncing. And we have got to the point where we can now start the transformation of services into more sustainable, lower cost and easier for the staff to operate.
Thank you. I'll just come back on a couple of points. Sorry, Councillor Evans-Swift.
What I find is the negativity is not helpful. I think you have to recognise that now we have a new team. That team has been selected very carefully, and the Cabinet, and I hope all the members will have growing confidence. We have the confidence that the team will deliver, and that they have assured us every time more and more we spend hours with them. They have a very open book with us, and I think it's time for everybody to recognize that it has changed. And I despair to have that negativity always brought back. I know where I came from. I remember the last 2 years before we have the new team. It was very painful. Now I would ask everybody to change the dialogue, because if we don't change, it's not helpful for us, but it's not also helpful for our residents. They are there, and we have no right to always bring back bad memories or bad. We need to move on and do the best we can, and this team is going to deliver. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecile. And just to add to that point, Councillor Scrimshaw mentions about accounting transactions to help us get through this. The fact is, if we weren't looking at all options available to us, would be cutting frontline services. So which way do you want it, basically? So that's the task we're challenged with doing, and we're trying to do the best, the very, very best that we can. Councillor Hakewell mentioned about the SIPFA report. That was work that was commissioned previously by the commissioners, but it's the auditors that give us our qualification on whether things are moving on, and there are discussions ongoing with the auditors right now. I don't know if Mr. Duncan wanted to reference any of the capital receipts or the school's PFI technical adjustments, or did Councillor Morris, can you answer those?
Yes, I think I've said all I can say about gritting. I think we just need to accept the good news that we are going back to previous levels and above levels. We will see what the plan comes out with, and then I'm sure we'll be consulting with all councillors on the routes that we're proposing. It is worth mentioning grit bins as well. I keep forgetting to mention them, but they're very important. We took 500 have been taken out, in fact, and 270 have been taken over by towns and parish councils. 80 were agreed to be removed. We can, and we will look at putting those back if we're asked to put them back. We will also fill them if we're asked to fill them in next year. I'm not sure about this year, although Roy may, is that for this year? Or could be for this year and next year. And we will replace the ones that have been taken out, as I say. We would also put new ones in, and we've always said we will still put new ones in if people request that through the service. But I just thought I'd mention that because we tend to mention gritting of roads, but we forget about the grit bins. In terms of the PFI school maintenance, I can't answer whether that be an ongoing issue, but what we don't like is poor performance, and the PFI has performed quite badly, and that's therefore why we've had this income, because the people who are operating the contract have not performed, and therefore we've had to fine them. Now, that's good in a way because we're getting money in, but as I'm sure Teresa and everyone else would agree, that's not acceptable. Poor performance of a contract is not great. I do add, of course, it wasn't taken out by us, but in fact by our Labour colleagues some number of years ago, but that's probably a cheap shot. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just one other point on Grittin. We need to acknowledge the contribution Northampton have made in helping us to reinstate the Grittin this year. Mr Duncan, I don't know if you wanted to mention about the pensions and any other technicalities.
Yeah, on pensions, the situation is it's because of our exceptional circumstances. It's a complete one-off. In terms of the impact on staff and their pensions, that is unaffected. Their benefits that they accrue and will receive are totally unaffected by this. But that will be explained in the report of the Pensions Committee. I think, given our circumstances that we find ourselves in, the fact that a number of initiatives are one-off, I think that is acknowledged, but the scale of the task was such that all options had to be considered. As has been said, the intention now is with 1920, that's the really important step as to making ourselves sustainable.
Yeah, the Chief Exec has got an update while we've been sitting here on the apprenticeships.
Apprenticeship levy. Yeah, I was very concerned to hear the statement that 660k was going back to government and we were going to lose it, because that wasn't a figure I recognised, and it concerned me somewhat. So I've had clarification on that. Last year there was 660k, which is the 0.5% of our salary, our wage bill effectively, that is identified as the apprenticeship levy. And last year there was a suggestion that we might be able to offset that by using existing staff, which of course we know is not always the right thing to do. You can do some of that, but you shouldn't do all of that. And needless to say, that wasn't deliverable. Therefore, we've reinstated that into the budget this year with the intention that we wouldn't do that. We will use that to bring in apprentices and to spend it on an apprenticeship levy. So that's where the 660k is. What we have to do is identify the amount in the budget. We then pay that amount over to government, and then they pay us back when we draw down on that on a monthly basis. So just to reassure you, I would have been alarmed if that was the case, and it isn't the case.
Thank you. So, colleagues, just to conclude then, we recognise that this year has been an incredible challenge for the organisation, and I would put it out there that it's responded in the best way it possibly can, with some very good people. All of us, members, Cabinet, have all contributed to that, and that's recognised. And we're very clear on the challenge, not only in delivering the rest of this year, but what lies before us, as is talked about with the budget next year. So, Cabinet, are we happy to agree the reports? Thank you. So, item 10, Councillor Morris is going to present this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the monthly capital report for outturns for the financial year ending 31st of March 2019 as at the 31st of December 2018, so period 9. If you look at the recommendations, there are 2.4 million new capital approvals across 6 schemes. 1.1 million of this being for NCC discretionary borrowing. Having said that, all of those schemes with borrowing are directly related to the stabilisation plan or other revenue savings this year or next year. Other key highlights are that the expenditure outturn is down from 101 million to 94 million, and there are various reasons for that listed in the report. But some of them they're quite technical, but there are, for instance, we've had money in from the from the government for highways of 6.8 million, so that's allowed some expenditure to go into that away from borrowings. The 94 million expenditure for 2018-19 consists of the following main items of 3.5 million and over. Northampton International Academy, Daventry Development Link Road, which is finished, but we're just sort of tidying up the last bits of it. the highways maintenance block, the A43 Phase 1B, Corby Send School, that's special educational needs, local highways maintenance grant, Chester Farm, and superfast broadband. Other people may want to comment individually on some of those items, but in terms of superfast broadband, we're certainly well ahead of our projected 98% coverage by 2020. We are working with various different parties like GigaClear now as well as BT to speed up the delivery. We're still very conscious, of course, of the rural areas, and we're working very hard, particularly with GigaClear, to get those rural areas covered. I think Malcolm would not forgive me if I didn't mention Crick Canal Bridge as well, which has it's got expenditure of 247,000 in there, but just to point out, that's all come from Daventry and various local commitments to that project, so it's not costing us a penny in actual fact. There are some pressures, obviously, on the project delivery, and there's a number of those that may cause concern, but at the moment don't seem to be. One worth mentioning is Radstone Field School, because there are some risks involved with that. That's a complicated story to do with the contractor, but I'm sure we'll find out more about that if people want to ask about that. Capital receipts, which is section 7, Ian Duncan has referred to that. The monthly report only reports those receipts banked and usable, so that's £55 million, and I'm sure Ian may reflect more on that, although he's already spoken about it. There's still a lot of work to secure sufficient receipts to allow us to use the maximum 70 million government dispensation, and we are working away furiously to achieve that. So at the moment, so we're about 15 million still to secure in order to be able to use that 70 million, but we're working hard on that. Discretionary borrowing, the P9 monthly report needs reading alongside the new capital strategy, which is included as part of the budget papers. This shows a significant reduction in the Council's plans to borrow from the 2018-19 strategy. It's basically a £35 million reduction. I will present the report to the Cabinet and happy to take any questions if I can answer them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to elaborate on the SEND school. The Red Kite Academy represents 8.1 million investment into education provision for children and young people with SEND in Corby and the environs. The school will eventually provide 145 students with a range of SEND needs who will now be able to access specialist provision in the area in which they reside, whereas previously they would have had to travel long distances in order to access this help. The free school was funded by the Education Skills and Funding Agency and delivered in partnership with NCC and the Academy Trust. It was delivered on time and slightly under budget. So a good news story, I think.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Councillor Hakewell, questions?
Questions, yes, not comments. Question number 1 is, forever until today or last time, the Isham bypass was mentioned in the capital report, and just like to ask the portfolio holder how far down the road that is and whether any discussions are taking place on that. Going back to the actual budget proposals, there is a HS2 road safety fund of 83,000. Given the national issue and even the Leader of the House's comments about the viability of HS2, is it clear that we won't start to spend that sort of money until we actually have some idea of whether HS2 is going into the quoted long grass in that way? I think those are the two I've got.
Thank you. Anything further from you guys? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I welcome the Red Kite Academy going ahead and being built. I can recall being at a meeting something like 4 years ago, an inaugural meeting to talk about that and trying to achieve that. So I'm very thankful we have.
Thank you. Councillor Stamborough, anything to add? No. Councillor Morris? Or Cabinet colleagues, is there any other comments? I think we just have to acknowledge that despite the challenges we've faced, there's some significant investments going in across the county.
Yes, and I would agree with you on that, Chair. sometimes you think we're not investing in anything, or you would imagine we're not, but what we've invested, particularly in infrastructure over the years, has been enormously beneficial to the county, and it will continue to be as we transition into unitaries. It's important that we recognise that, and some of the things we'll be setting up now in terms of infrastructure will benefit the 2 new unitaries when they come into being. Which brings me on to Councillor Hakewell's question. The Isham bypass, as everyone probably knows, has had a long story. It's a long and tortuous history, it's fair to say. The funding was pulled by SEMLEP some time ago, but there are ongoing discussions as to how that could potentially be delivered. I'm not going to go into details as to what those conversations are, but they are still ongoing, and we are hopeful that we will maybe be able to resurrect the Isham bypass in due course. It won't, of course, be delivered before we become a unitary, but that's not necessarily the reason is to get it going rather than to frustrate it until we're a unitary. So that in answer to that, the Road Safety Fund is sort of linked with the Chipping Warden Relief Road, both of which HS2 are paying for. They've already started the Chipping Warden Relief Road. It would be slightly strange if it was stopped, if that stopped. So we already also the Road Safety Fund, we already have the money, and we're already allocating it to communities that require various things, doing speed issues and various other things in relation to HS2. So we're already applying those through the liaison group and obviously other means as well. So if HS2 was to be cancelled, I'm fairly confident that, and that's a big if, by the way, but if it was, the Road Safety Fund and the Chipping Warden Relief Road would be secure, as far as I'm aware. And they're the 2 major benefits that we've received from this county, from HS2. So hopefully that answers your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morris. Cabinet, we happy to agree with the report? Okay, item 11 is the quarterly Treasury Management Report, and I'll be presenting that. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update Cabinet on the Council's Treasury Management activities as a part of the 2018-2019 Treasury Management Strategy. The key points to highlight is, of course, the economic position, and the commentary continue to focus around the Brexit negotiations, and of course this will continue to do so throughout the next quarter. The bank base rate has remained unchanged in this period. However, this has not had an adverse impact on the borrowing costs the Council has come across. Loans to other authorities, this is a popular topic and they're listed in the paper. So the Council again reiterates that there is no risk to the repayment of loans to other local authorities. The Council has not defaulted on any loan repayment, even in the tight financial context within which we operate. Further still, the Council has an under-borrowed position, which is the amount of headroom in the Council's underlying borrowing requirement and the amount of external debt on the Council's books. This provides further robustness in the ability of the Council to meet liabilities as they fall due. Since the Q3 report was drafted, the Council has repaid £52 million of short-term loans from other local authorities, and importantly has managed to secure short-term loans to the value of about £70 million from various local authorities. And if you refer to the table at the end and in the papers, it shows how loans have been repaid. In February and March, further short-term loans are required for cash flow purposes, which the Treasury team are actively working on. In terms of borrowing, during Q3, external borrowing reduced by £24.6 million. The balance of outstanding borrowing at the end of Q3 was £578.6 million. The Council remains within its borrowing limits as at Q3 and is forecast to do so for the remainder of 2018-2019. Lobo loans, another one of our favourites. During the period, and as reported in the mid-year Treasury report, the Council refinanced 2 Lobo loans, generating revenue savings over the life of the loans. Officers are also considering the refinancing of an inverse Lobo. This is a more complicated financial instrument, and work is continuing to address the benefit of the Council of refinancing this loan. Investments, no new investments were made during the quarter. The investments held on the Council's books are those relating to the University of Northampton, LGSS Law, the Northants Cricket Club and the Equity in the Municipal Bonds Agency, brackets MBA, is currently held as an equity investment. Regarding the MBA, the organisation is yet to issue its first bond, and there is concern amongst other councils about the going concern of the MBA, and so some councils are beginning to write off their investment to MBA. This is something that the council is keeping under review. Overall, I think this is a positive paper for Cabinet, and it represents solid Treasury management, and I'm happy to recommend it to Cabinet. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, if I may, about LOBO loans. The level of private sector loans is mentioned in this report. We had £150 million worth of these, what are described as toxic LOBO loans, including, I believe, £20 million with Barclays Bank. So my question, is it true that Barclays have approached us with a deal to change these loans to a different type of loan, and did we subsequently take up that offer? The reason I ask is I note that there is legal action for compensation has been started against Barclays from several bigger and better run councils than ourselves, including Nottingham, Newcastle and Manchester Combined Authority. They're seeking compensation because Barclays have already been found guilty of fixing the LIBOR interest rate, which these loans are linked to. And my question is then, if we do have a new arrangement with Barclays, did we sign an undertaking not to pursue them for any kind of compensation? And if we did, bearing in mind the approach that those other councils are taking, I think I would have to question whether NCC took the best approach, and I can't help wonder whether, you know, we would have been better advised to have joined in with that joint action instead of taking a different path. If we haven't, however, renegotiated those loans from Barclays, why haven't we joined in that class action, and there's still an opportunity to do so?
Thank you. Councillor Stanborough.
Thank you, Chair. Appendix C is an interesting one, I have to say. Gives a lot of very useful detail, and it's well worth a read. Looking at Appendix C, there are two loans currently with the Public Works Loans Board that mature, one in September 19 and one in January 20, so that is in the coming financial year. Currently we're paying around 4% interest on both. There's 20 million quid in total. That implies about £800,000 worth of interest a year on those two. I'm assuming we might roll those over when they mature. I'd be interested to know whether at what interest rate we're planning to roll them over, whether we feel that it might be prudent to take advantage of the much lower short-term interest rates that are available to do that. Likewise, there were two loans that we started in last year, both on the 22nd of October at 2.69% and 2.67% respectively, both for £10 million, at a time when short-term interest rates available to us were more like 1.1%. So why are we not taking advantage of these shorter-term interest rates to save ourselves money now, when now is the time we need to be saving money?
Thank you. Councillor Hankwell.
Yes, thank you, Leader. My question relates to LOBO loans and a little bit of the preamble that you put forward, and I don't necessarily expect you to be able to answer it off the cuff, but in relation to those LOBO loans that have been renegotiated, could we have a note round just to identify what income has come to the revenue budget as a result of those renegotiations?
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments from Cabinet? Nope. Okay. So on the point Councillor Scrimshaw started about the LOBO loans and the action taken by that group, I'm aware of that, and I've spoken to the Chief Exec about it to see whether there's anything we can do, frankly. The other questions are technical, and I'll ask Mr Duncan, if he could answer some of those. If not, we can get a paper or something around, especially on the last point. 151 officer.
So looking at the detail Appendix E, which is pages 21 through to 23, we deliberately wanted to include this in the report so that there is complete transparency around our operations. The bottom half of page 22 refers to market lenders. Barclays Bank appears 3 times as a fixed rate loan. That's where we've converted from a lowball loan to a fixed rate. So we have done that. I don't know the detail of the of that conversion in terms of any talk about compensation. That's something I would look into. In terms of our ability to join the action, that's something we would have to come back on. The loans that are due to mature in 1920, the first 2 on page 21, that would be something considered at the time as part of normal Treasury management review. And the loan that was taken out in October 2018, what I would imagine with that is what we try to do is have a balanced portfolio. Certainly our portfolio is largely aimed towards the short end, but it is to try and give some sort of balance. I would imagine that was the consideration at the time.
Okay, thank you. Cabinet, are we happy to note the recommendations? Thank you. On to item 12, the Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service Statement of Assurance. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very, very brief on this because it's quite a technical paper. As we know, the fire service is actually technically transferred now to the police and did so very smoothly, so we're very grateful for that, and all our officers that work very hard on that. But we still have to provide this statement of assurance, certainly till April of this year. I'm not quite sure what will happen after that because I'm not sure that the police are structured to be able to give that. We as the authority may still have to do that even though they've transferred over. But it's an interesting document. I recommend it to everybody to read, but I won't go through it today, and that's simply it's simply one of those things that we have to do every year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Defer to Councillor Stracker.
Councillor Strachan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief, as stated by my colleague over here. Chairman, I understand that the Fire and Rescue Authority Statement of Assurance is a legal requirement. The statement as it stands, obviously, has got our full support. However, we are intrigued as to why it is so late coming to Cabinet, because this is the statement for 2017-18. So could we have some explanation as to why this statement is only now coming to Cabinet? Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Okay. I can answer that question if you want, Councillor Morris. I understand because of the transfer and the delay in the accounts, there's hence the delay in this coming to Cabinet.
Yes, in fact, the accounts are due to be approved by the end of January 19, so that's presumably why, although it didn't say that.
Okay.
Well, it's just to confirm that is my understanding.
Yeah.
Normally this statement would be as part of the consideration of the accounts because they've been delayed. We did think the accounts would be ready by January. We now are looking at March. We're still in discussion with KPMG over that. So I think that's the reason for the delay. Okay. We didn't want to delay it any further.
Thank you. Cabinet, are we happy to agree with the recommendations? Agreed. So item 13, the future arrangements for the treatment and disposal of residual waste. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be as brief on this one, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. But this is an important paper, actually, because it does play into the whole future structures and things like that for the county. But essentially, this is about recommendations relating to 3 aspects of the waste management service. Our main contract was due to expire in 2020, which meant we had to start thinking, certainly with the residual waste, to look at replacing that contract in some way. It wasn't really possible for us to do nothing because, as I say, it would expire in 2020, and when we're a unitary authority, they would have absolutely no lead-in time to arrange their own residual waste contracts. So we looked at a number of options for this. There was a 3 and a 5, and I think maybe a 2 or I can't remember what it was, but it's in the paper. And it was decided that 3 years was the best option because that gives time for both unitaries to start to harmonise their waste and all the other things that they have to do when they become a unitary. And the last thing really that any new organisation needs to worry about is their waste disposal or residual waste disposal on day 1. So the recommendation is that it is, in fact, extended by 3 years. We have been in discussions with all our district and borough colleagues, both at member level and at officer level, and probably at chief executive level as well. So all our districts and boroughs are aware of this option that we're putting on the table here, and I think they're all agreed that this is the best option going forward, and that will also give them time to think about waste disposal, energy from waste, and all sorts of other things that will come as a result of the changing world of waste disposal. The second element of this is an extension of the wood waste treatment contract. And obviously we're recommending that extend the contract as well for that. It's a smaller contract, but nonetheless important. And then thirdly, the paper talks about the Northamptonshire Waste Partnership and the Memorandum of Understanding. We have agreed to, or been asked and agreed to return to the Waste Partnership. All the authorities are now back within the Waste Partnership, so I think it really is a good platform for discussing the future of waste in the county, and it will have some lead-in time on perhaps that discussion. The borough have gone back in and we've gone back in, and they've also agreed to waive the fee for going back in, which is helpful because we might have struggled to get that through. So I'm looking forward to us rejoining that and taking part fully in those discussions. So that's it in a nutshell, Chair. The recommendations are there. I put that before the Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Defer again to Councillor Strachan.
Welcome back, Councillor Strachan.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I have to say that we fully support this paper, all of it, because it makes sense. However, we've got this query on the treatment and disposal of residual waste. On page 42, Chairman, we see an ongoing increase in the cost of treating the waste, the residual waste. But based on the policy of this council, we were looking to see a reduction in the cost rather than an increase. So could we have some sort of explanation for this, please, Chairman? Again, sorry about that.
Thank you. Councillor Hakewill.
Thank you, Chairman. The comment was made earlier about negativism, but as my understanding is, we sit here to ask questions. I would love to praise what's going on, but I can't make a question out of it. So it's almost inevitable that the questions we ask are going to be deeply scrutinising. I would love to say I praise this, but you're going to tell me I shouldn't.
Have you got a question?
Exactly. My point is made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if you'd like to respond to Councillor Strachan.
Councillor Strachan, well, I mean, the waste market is a very complicated market. It is worth pointing out that this is one of the biggest contracts we have as well. It is a massive contract, and it's one that often people don't think about, I suppose. But in terms of market forces, there's a lot of inflation on the contract and market forces, as well as volume, which affects the pricing there. But obviously we're still always aiming to drive as much value out of every contract that we sign or look at that we can, but you've got to build in future profits for the companies and things like that that are providing that. But I can assure you that we are driving hard on all our contracts, but particularly these ones, to make sure we get the best value for money. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. And just to, it's good to note that we're back in the waste partnership, having been in and out, as with other authorities as well. And of course, the point you made around harmonisation is very pertinent. I recall a presentation our group had by a leader from another authority talking about the unitary journey, and talked about harmonisation taking 8 to 9 years to get through, and waste was one of the biggest areas to deal with. So, Cabinet, are we happy to agree the reports? Thank you. Okay, item 14, recommendation of the future of specialist dementia domiciliary care service following the consultation. Councillor Naden-Hawley.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be too long on this one because I think it's quite self-explanatory. I just want Cabinet to consider the notes and the feedback received from the consultation process. Agreed to move the specialist dementia domiciliary care service to the provider market, and note the content of this report and also the EQIA. I'll just give a little bit of the history. The specialist dementia domiciliary care service has been part of adult in-house provider service Olympus Care for over 10 years. And it was set up to provide an enhanced domiciliary care service for customers with dementia. This includes supporting customers with personal care, medication, management, attending medical appointments, etc. At that time, dementia was less common, and most domiciliary care was for low-level needs to support daily personal care tasks. Part of the reason for establishing Olympus Care Service was therefore to address areas of the market where adults were facing challenges, meeting growing needs and demand, but there was limited supply and any provision was high cost. Specialist domiciliary care was one of those areas. The introduction of the domiciliary care framework in 2018, this allowed for varied rates of pay dependent on complexity of need and the care offered and delivered within specific zones across the county. Rather than set a fixed rate for all levels of support in all areas, this means that there is now more providers who deal with a range of care, who may be able to deliver care more cost effectively, as they are already operating within a fixed area and across a range of clients. I think the thing with it is, going forward, Cabinet, the thing to notice is that there will be, it's not a case of just dropping people off onto other providers. There's going to be a robust handover process between service providers and the clients. So it ensures that we're able to meet the needs of the customers, and will involve them and their families with this process, and where necessary, care management. And monitoring will continue by the quality monitoring team. So I present the paper to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Defer to Councillor Stone.
Thank you. It isn't really very clear to me, Chair, why in a 90-bed unit we've only managed to fill 23 beds, where we know demand is going up and there's a lot of pressure in the sector. So I don't really understand the business case for what is being suggested. And it also seems to me to be going counter to the trend which I've welcomed here before, which is about bringing services in-house. And I'm very mindful of what was said. I can't remember if it was in the LGA peer review or in the Calla report, which made the point that one of the weaknesses in previous administrations was that it was following the market, not shaping the market. And I'm very mindful of that. And I'm also very mindful that there was a time not long ago when we were talking about extending NCC provision, even to the point of building and running our own dementia villages. So I don't really get how this is going to improve outcomes for people with dementia. And I don't understand how private providers who have to put percentages on the costs for their profits are going to be able to run a service more effectively and more cost effectively than we could ourselves. I don't understand it.
Thank you. Councillor Stanborough.
Defer to Councillor Meredith.
Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to say I've been looking around this room and thinking about dementia. Do you know that in this room, there's going to be 15 people in this room that are actually going to suffer dementia sometime in their lives, and that is a fact. That is a fact. I've done a count up on it, so that is a fact. You talk about the carers. I've done a lot of work with dementia patients. I've done stood on many committees and visited very many people suffering from dementia, and to see the extent of this illness that it causes to people. I've also spoken to carers, and the carers tell me that they don't get enough support from the county council. But what I want to say, Chair, through you, is that I am actually, once this issues about our budgets and where we are with our finance, I want this county council to get back talking about ordinary things that affect ordinary people's lives. So I hope that you do take my comments on board, because I get very, very annoyed that people tell me, especially in the area that I represent, that they are not receiving services from the county council. And that is true. That is true. So we need to put that in context. And we also need to start setting up organisations to help the carers who are looking after these particular people. Because, as I said before, and I don't want to repeat myself, it is a terrible illness for people to suffer. I have known people who have been into public life that have suffered dementia, and they do not know that they've even been into public life. That's how bad it is. So I would urge the portfolio holder and some of the other councillors who are interested in dementia to get in touch with the Borough Council over the road and to have a look at some of the work the Borough Council has done in making Northamptonshire, or especially in Northampton, which I have to speak about, a dementia-friendly town. I'm not going to go on anymore, but I'm just going to say, have a think. 15 people in this room will get dementia. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Meredith. Are there any other comments from Cabinet? Councillor Naden-Hawley.
I'm just going to make a couple of comments, but then I'm going to hand over to the Director of Adult Social Services to comment further. Thank you, Councillor Meredith. Well, hopefully I won't be one of those 15 people, and thank you for that information. We are talking to healthcare partners. We are very well aware of the situation in Northamptonshire. It is something that is talked about regularly at all the meetings that I go to, health and well-being, etc. But I'm going to hand over to Anna now, because she has a bit, because I think there's a bit of a lack of understanding of what this is actually all about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up Councillor Stone's point. So the first point is this is not a bedded unit. This is not a care home. This is home care, so domiciliary care, as we would normally call it. So what we're talking about is we had 90 home care spaces available with staff to provide them, but we've only got 23 booked into the rotas. So it's not about beds, it is actually just about home care. Just to come on to the other point about the trend of not bringing it in-house, and the point about not shaping the market, it's actually because we shaped the market by having this service so that more providers provided specialist dementia care, that we're able to withdraw this service, because now there is a provision in the county, and a much bigger provision, where previously we didn't have one. So actually, you know, in terms of what we're doing, we're able to release that. But what we do need to do, and we are doing, and it's in some of our commissioning plans and published plans, is to grow more bedded solutions for dementia care and extra care, dementia spaces, which we're doing currently. And we also still retain about 80 places in our own care homes for dementia care too. So we still have got an in-house provision for that. With regard to the private sector making more profit than us, in reality, our staff are on relatively, I'll say this, good terms and conditions in terms of their total costs and their pension costs compared to the private sector. So actually, our cost per hour for our staff to provide this service is probably not as cost effective as the private sector doing it. But as the report says, we are not getting rid of these staff. What we're doing is taking really skilled staff who've got some really, really good understanding and experience, and putting into some of our other areas of high costs and high pressure, so that they can help us, for example, with dementia care coming out of hospitals. And that's a far more effective use of their time, and actually better for the council economically as well. Just in terms of extending our provision and the dementia village, I think as councillors know, we previously talked about doing that. We are still exploring options to do that. There is quite a growing trend anyway to make that part of your extra care provision. And the services plans in terms of its transformation very much is focusing and looking on what we do in terms of that provision going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Leader. A couple of points. First one is that Councillor Meredith's forecast of 15 members of the people in this room is probably an underestimate. Speaking as a statistician, you're looking at a cohort who have already removed the early leavers, shall we say, people who've died young. So if people who've reached this age, the proportion who'll get dementia is a lot higher than Councillor Meredith was suggesting. Just to throw a little bit in. Right, now, referring to the actual paper itself, I think it's very clear that the council is not of critical mass for this provision. We just don't do enough of it to make it cost effective. Each care provider can support several clients, so you're talking about a very small number of staff, and it just isn't cost effective to run a service with that few staff and that few clients.
Thank you. Certainly support the recommendations in the paper. And before we note them, I'll just ask Cabinet to make sure they have read the Equalities Impact Assessment at page 83. We happy with that? Very good. Okay, Cabinet, we happy to note the report? Thank you. Item 15, the determination of admission arrangements for local authority maintain community and voluntary controlled schools in Northamptonshire for the 2020 intake. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Leader. NCC is the admission authority for all community and voluntary controlled schools in Northamptonshire. We are responsible for setting the admission arrangements for all of these schools. It is a statutory duty of the Council to determine the admission arrangements by the 28th of February every year, and for admissions for September 2020. The papers have come to Cabinet so that the admission arrangements for the 2020 intake to our schools can be determined, formally agreed in other words, by Cabinet by the appropriate date. When challenges are made to admission arrangements, there has to be a consultation on the changes, which has to take place a minimum of 6 weeks period between the 1st of October and the 11th of January. We have not consulted on this paper this year because there are no fundamental changes to the 2019 admission criteria oversubscription criteria for schools for the 2020 intakes. They remain exactly the same as before, which were determined last year. The only changes that have been made are that the administration system has been made slightly simpler for people to apply. I've got a copy of the forms here, and it was felt that last year they were perhaps a bit more complicated than they needed to be, and therefore people had problems filling them in. So we have slightly arranged a different system in that way, but it is still online. Everything is online, but I have been reassured that there will be access for, I'm sure Ms Councillor Heck will be pleased, to the computers in the library to fill these forms in for those who haven't got access to computers at home. And our staff will be going around the county in different areas having workshops to help people fill these forms in before the due date, and hopefully they can also ring in and have a form sent to them if that's their wish. So hopefully we've covered all the bases on this, and we will have a smooth transition into the current system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions? And just to remind Councillor Hagel that all of our libraries are open.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're talking about this is 2020.
Right, Councillor Cecile.
Yes, and also by applying online, you have the result on the day, so it's much quicker. So for the parents, they are assured as soon as possible. Whereas if they do it manually, they need to wait 5 days, which is a great improvement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Baker, anything else you wanted to add?
No, just to draw people's attention to the recommendations on the first page. So we're determining the admission, agree to the relevant area for schools, and agree to primary and secondary coordinated schemes.
Okay, thank you. Cabinet, are we happy to agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. So as item 16 has been withdrawn, that brings us to the end of the meeting, and thank you everybody for your contribution, and I'll be happy to receive any feedback on this format ready for the next one. Thank you.